every once in a while, the Hand Drink Solo team comes across this Indiana Jones type wine brand that really just possesses this incredibly infectious sense of adventure. And it's all about off the beaten path kind of trails of discovery that end up at these spectacular vineyards and produce even more spectacular wine. Today, the wines that we are exploring are from the Cape of Good Hope range. And the wine of the day is the Cape of Good Hope Altima Sauvignon Blanc, made from, again, spectacular vineyards sitting at between 600 and 800 meters above sea level in the wine ward of Elandskloof, in this magical little land before time hidden mountain valley. Incidentally, if you want to stay up to speed with the discovery of these incredible vineyards, or just talk about wine chemistry and history and unusual cultivars, then you really should subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, because we have almost 400 videos just like this one. And give us a like, as it'll help others to discover more of our content. The Cape of Good Hope wine brand is actually part of a larger umbrella brand of Anthony Rupert wines. And inside that umbrella, there are ranges like the Lormerans range of MCCs. And then there is also the Anthony Rupert main range, which includes famous wines like the Bordeaux blend called Optima. And then, of course, you trickle down a little further and you have more lifestyle-y brands like Protea and Terra del Capo. And because all of these wine ranges are in fact made in one cellar on a farm in Franschhoek, they don't have one winemaker, they have an entire team. But for our purposes, the two winemakers who are most relevant who work on the Cape of Good Hope range are Mark van Buuren, who makes all of the white wines, and Vernon van der Hoofen, who makes all of the red wines. Both of these guys are not only supremely competent and also multi-award winners in their own right, but if you care about this sort of thing, they also happen to be hugely personable characters. In the past, the Hand Drink Solo Wine Club has featured a number of wines from the Cape of Good Hope range, including their Saruria Chardonnay, which is this insane wine that is made again from vineyards up at 700 or 800 meters above sea level. And it's on a farm that has planted Chardonnay clones that have never been seen before in South Africa. They're a hugely pioneering team. Then we've also covered one of their Swartland Shirazes, the Riebeck's Rivier Swartland Shiraz, and that comes from another spectacular vineyard sitting at around 500 meters above sea level. And they also have a whole range of really, really epic old vine Chennets. But for today, the wine that we are focusing on is the Altima Sauvignon Blanc. I would argue this is one of the most distinctive and expressive Sauvignon Blancs that South Africa has to offer. The fruit that goes into the Altima Sauvignon Blanc, in fact, comes from the farm of Altima, which is, again, up at 700 or 800 meters above sea level in the Elandskloof. And it really is in this super magical mountainous bowl. There is this insane natural amphitheater of cliffs and crags and then this lush valley, which really looks like something out of Ice Age 3. In other videos, we've spoken about the incredibly steep mountains on either side of this valley and how these cast shadows very early in the day, which therefore reduces the heat of those afternoons during ripening season. But then the fact that the vineyard is up between 600 and 800 meters above sea level means that there is also an incredibly high diurnal range. And I've done a whole range of videos on how that really helps to get sugar ripening and phenolic ripening to end at the same time in warmer climates. Like, if you want a short analogy, I guess in a really cool climate, getting grapes to ripen well for high quality wine is kind of like shooting a balloon out of the sky. All you need to do is make sure that the bullet ends up at the same place as the very slow moving balloon. In South Africa, it's a little more like clay pigeon shooting, where actually the clay pigeon is moving quite fast, it's quite small, and you have to be a really good shot to make sure that your bullet ends up in the same spot as that clay pigeon. So warmer climates makes it much harder to get wine grapes to ripen as they should. But in a valley like this, with long mountain shadows and high diurnal range and a whole bunch of reasons why this is a really far cooler little microclimate, it is just an insane spot to grow wine grapes. And that is why the Cape of Good Hope team picked this farm. Again, talking about geographical and climatic elements is fun, but not tasty. So let's get into the glass and see what Mark van Buuren has prepared for us. When we give this guy a sniff, well, I mean, it really is an insanely extroverted wine. It bursts out the glass. You can almost smell it from across the table. You get this wonderful mix of elderflower, but then also greener herbal kind of lime leaf notes. And these are interspersed with passion fruit and guava notes. It really is a wonderful mix of kind of slightly greener citrus and florals and tropical fruit. Now, when we give this guy a sip, well, I mean, the palate weight is considerable, especially compared to many of the Sauvignon Blancs that come out of South Africa. There is just such incredible, beautiful concentration. And the cool thing to note here is that the winemaking is generally fairly simple. Perhaps the only trick Mark van Buuren does do is that he lets the grapes sit on their skins prior to fermentation for up to 16 hours. And so you get a lot more of the building blocks into the juice that will eventually become volatile aromatics and flavor compounds. So that partially explains the onslaught of beautiful flavors, but also the yield for this vineyard is 7 tons per hectare. And you might go, oh, what the hell is that? Is it just a piece of string? Well, to give you an idea, some of the kind of commercial bulk wines for Sauvignon Blanc might produce as many as 30 tons of fruit per hectare. And perhaps Chardonnay in some areas in South Africa goes as high as 40 tons, I'm told. So the equation you need to have here is that the number of vines is still the same, whether you produce 30 tons of fruit or 7 tons of fruit. They can only do as much work as they can do. And when they ripen fruit, they can only produce as many building blocks for flavors and aromas as they can in a day. They all have finite limits. So when you reduce yield and cut off some bunches or slow down the rate at which fruit is produced, those vines can pour all of their energies into far less fruit. And the end result is generally a far more concentrated, extroverted wine with incredible layers and concentration. And that's what we have here. Concentration aside, the fruit basket approach to wine tasting is particularly suited to this wine. You've got this beautiful, juicy Seville orange up front. We already mentioned passion fruit. And then you've got a really interesting interplay between even a touch of sweet, perhaps pineapple, and that is then smashed by some bitter, freshly squeezed ruby grapefruit juice that comes in over the top. And so you've got the sweet and bitter interplay. It's hugely dynamic. And then towards the end, as the kind of fruit eventually tails off, you've got this really beautifully elegant, pristine, long line of lime juice that kind of trickles along and really leaves your mouth watering. It's like the silk thread that ties everything together and leaves you with a very beautifully packaged final experience. The fascinating thing about this is that all of these vines are planted with Sauvignon Blanc clone 316. We talked about passion fruit and guava on the palate and grapefruit and lime. And coincidentally, the textbook answer for what clone 316 is supposed to taste like is passion fruit, guava, grapefruit, and lime. So at least we know that they are faithfully communicating what the grape stock is meant to communicate. As a kind of parting thought, I feel like perhaps this wine is a little like Travis Barker from Blink-182, in that from the outside, it seems like it's part of a band that is full of juvenile lowlifes who just play practical jokes and write simple punk ditties. But when you look closer, you realize that despite the punk ditties that he does veritably play, he is an absolute master in his genre. And I really feel like this Sauvignon Blanc is masterful and something that Sauvignon Blanc fans, and even those who aren't Sauvignon Blanc fans, need to track down and taste and compare this one to your favorites. I'd love to hear what they are, and I should set up a blind tasting. But that's all we have time for today. So I will not leave you alone in this moment of awe. Instead, I will leave links to 2 videos. One of them is a link to a Swartland Chenin Blanc that we've covered before, made by the Cape of Good Hope wine range. And the other is that Syrah that I mentioned earlier, again from the Swartland. I think watching those 2 videos will give you a much more complete sense of what the Cape of Good Hope wine project is all about.